Hi, my name is Jess, and I'm the host of the Miss Libertarian podcast. Today I'm joined with Estela, who is a social media strategist off Lola and an activist in Guatemala. So today we're going to be discussing whether the LGBT community has gone too far, whether they're fighting for or against freedom, because this month is Pride Month. And I think one of the main things we've seen this Pride Month, after the Dylan Mulvaney and the Bud Light situation, is that companies aren't really, they're not putting their logo as like rainbow colours, they're not appealing to the LGBT community as much. And I think they've seen the reaction of Bud Light going broke because they went woke through that. And they're worried about that. They don't want to go in the same way Bud Light has. And I think that's quite interesting, because I think it's important that if you have a political persuasion, if you're for or against something politically, the best way to show that isn't through the coercion of the state, but it's through capitalism and, the marketplace, vote with your dollar. And I think that's so important. And that's previously been used to elevate the LGBT community through, supporting brands. There was a reason why woke capitalism, there was like this meme that every, on the 1st of June, every company would change their logo to like a rainbow flag. That was there for a reason.
At the end of the day, it has changed. The market changed. I think there has been two sides to that change. The first one is, of course, the Bud Light and all the backlash that people affected against certain brands that were promoting the LGBT community and stuff. There was also last year in which there were a lot of articles from the LGBT community talking about this rainbow marketing stuff, which were companies were profiting off LGBT stuff, but they weren't really providing anything to the LGBT community. And that enraged a lot of other people in the LGBT community. I think that at the end of the day, it was a difficulty for the market, but at the same time, there were other parts of the LGBT community that were really happy to see products that they had identify with and they could purchase. I think that I understand why some customers do not want to see any LGBT stuff in a store, but I do also understand how other customers do want to see those things in the store. And I think that at the end of the day, the free market has to be able to decide which customers this store wants to appeal to. In an ideal market, perhaps you will have both customers simply choosing which stores they want and which stores they do not want. What we do not want as libertarians is the state to get in the middle of this. You do not want this to be politicized and to get the Congress or the president or anyone talking about what should be in the market. I think customers should be able to boycott whatever store they want, and they should be able to support any store they want. Either it's buying LGBT stuff or buying another store that does not sell LGBT stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a key aspect of capitalism, that two people with completely different ideologies can coexist. For example, if you want a red pen, for example, slightly less political, but someone else wants a green pen, you both can coexist under capitalism. But if it was the state producing all this stuff, you'd have to choose between, what colour pen it would be, and that would be, the main thing. And it's the same with this. Another example is less to do with capitalism, but more to do with freedom. But similarly, to do with private property, is the issue of women's only spaces and women's sports. I think under a free market system, there should be spaces which include trans women, and similarly there should be spaces which hear and show the concerns of women who don't feel comfortable with biological men going into their spaces, and have a safe space for that. I don't think there's anything libertarian about violating the consent of somebody and not giving them the choice to enter a space they don't feel comfortable with. So I think it's just providing women that choice, because there are women who feel safe with trans women going into their toilets, and there's women who don't feel safe with trans women going into their toilets. And the free market provides that choice, similar with sports, for example. And we've seen athletes like Riley Gaines speak out against that, and that's speak out against trans women going into sports with Leah Thomas, for example. And they've seen the backlash towards that. So I think, free speech is essential with this, and allowing people choice. And I think that is the main points of capitalism and freedom. And another thing as well, I think when we talk about LGBT rights, it's often from a Western context. We normally focus on Canada, the UK, and America, and maybe some of Europe, which is slightly less relevant, I say, as a Brit. We just think about these countries here, whereas there are countries which still have laws criminalizing homosexuality. And I think that's where the emphasis should be with Pride Month and the LGBT community. I think that's one of the main things we should focus on, where you're not allowed to be gay in these countries. Never mind, like, all this extra stuff. Never mind these companies, concerning yourself about these companies with, like, the rainbow flag or whatever. I think the main fight should be fight for basic liberty before it goes on to other things. And I think, you could talk about, like, Western privilege. The left always likes to talk about privilege, but they never seem to think about their privilege as somebody in a developed country with all these rights and freedoms. And I think they should use that privilege, recognize your privilege to fight for these countries where LGBT people don't have basic rights.
I think like there was like two topics. Like the first one is like pride and the law, and then also the trans women topic, which I think it's super important, because for trans women specifically, I think it's like a gigantic debate, which I understand how complex it is, because we're talking about women, I mean trans women that are being affected by this discussion, but it's also cisgender women and how they do not feel safe. Some of them do not feel safe, and sometimes it is easy to discredit that. Like it's like I know in the media it's always like discredited and it's silenced, but I think that by silencing it, you're not really being able to understand where that concern comes from. I think the only way we can actually have a real discussion is we are listening to each other. So you have like one side of the population of women, which is like worry about their safety, and then another side which is like we want to support trans women because we believe they're women, and then there's trans women that are being affected by this entire discussion. And I think that we can have disagreements, but we do not have to forget that we're at the end of the day talking about human beings that are being affected by whatever we're talking about. That does not mean that we shouldn't talk about that. What it means is that we shouldn't allow government or the state to determine the tone of the conversation, or determine what we should be doing about any topic like sports or children or whatever. I don't think that we need like people like Ron DeSantis, for instance, signing bills banning trans women from anything. Like we do not want that, because it silences the discussion, it affects real people, and it takes away women the ability to choose from themselves what they actually want. Going to like the pride and the law stuff, I think that sometimes it is quite easy to say like, oh, the LGBT has become so political and stuff, and we do not want it to be political. It shouldn't have political sense. But at the same time, we have LGBT being prosecuted by the state by the sole fact of their sexuality. So, of course, these individuals feel that their identity and their sexuality is political, because their existence is politically spoke about, politically illegal. Like it's lawfully just, it's not lawful to be them themselves. So of course the LGBT became political, but it became that because it's individuals being attacked by the state or being imprisoned by the state. I mean, in my country, I'm from Guatemala, and same sex is not legal. Like, you cannot get married if you are like in a gay relationship, which is insane, because you have the state controlling even the most intimate parts of social interactions, which is your partner. So of course, I think that being LGBT in some countries, it's absolutely a political stance. I think that pride, it's this pride is about individuals wanting to be free. It's about them wanting to be like feel free from government coercion. It is a libertarian topic, even though like I think like most people think it's like a woke topic and stuff, but in essence, it's LGBT people want to be free and free from coercion, and they do not want to be in prison because they love someone, as long as they're not hurting anyone else.
I think on the opposite end as well, though, even though we do have these egregious like human rights violations with a lot of countries who still don't recognise LGBT people, on the other hand as well, I think the state is promoting or pushing an agenda, a woke agenda, because I think the issue with the term like woke capitalism is thrown around a lot. And is it really capitalism to blame? Like we've discussed before, capitalism only just shows what people want, what the consumer wants. It's not political, it's not pushing an agenda. Whereas with the state, for example, in the UK, we have the Equality Act, which basically enforces, diversity inclusion officers into every public sphere and into the private sphere as well. We wonder why all these jobs are coming about, and it's not because of capitalism. It's because of statism. It's because of government interference and regulation, and that's been pushed. I think with Ron DeSantis, sports is a different thing, which is, you can debate it's not libertarian. Same with like medical stuff and children as well. Children's always a bit of an iffy thing with libertarians because it's like, they can't consent, but who should make the decisions with children? And that's that's a whole conversation itself. But I think with Ron DeSantis, one thing which I think as a libertarian you can support is banning sexually explicit books in public schools. I think, when the state has already got a monopoly on this, I think it just depends, what should be allowed or not. Like Rothbard said, if the government does own something, it should be utilised and run as efficiently as possible. And I wrote an article in regards to Extinction Rebellion, how they, for example, they block roads, they protest and stop roads, and until the glorious day that all the roads are privatised, I think it's actually okay that the government stops them and takes them away, because that's a violation of the public space. I think that's within their rights to do so, as under a public system, a private system, when the roads are privately owned, the private owner would be able to take these people away from disrupting traffic, because you don't want ambulances unable to help people, and it's causing people unable to get to work. And it's the same with schools, which is under the public control. I think it's different with private schools. They should be able to do whatever they want. It's up to the parent and the child. But with public schools, when the government already has this authority, should they allow anyone in? There are some regulations. Like, for example, you wouldn't allow, someone who is like explicitly harmful to children. And in the same way, that might be seen as crushing liberty. I disagree. I think that's, how the state, if the state has this ability, they should be allowed to do that. Obviously, I want a position where schools are run by private companies rather than the state. But until that day, it has to be run pragmatically, I'd say. So there has to be limitations with that. So I applaud Ron DeSantis with that.
I think that with the Ron DeSantis banning sexually explicit books, first, we have to actually search what he means by sexually explicit. I do not agree with the government banning any type of books, even if they're polemical books. I don't think the government should be banning any books, especially in a space in which is educational. I think that in my liberty-minded view, parents have knowledge of what's best for their kids. I don't think the state should be determining what type of books their children are reading. I think parents should be able to decide what books their children are reading. I do not agree with any type of intervention by government in books specifically. I think that books should not be banned. It should not be touched. And I think that every time government has been banning books, it's been in really shady times, which is not convenient for history. Every time government bans books, it's for authoritarian reasons. Ron DeSantis hasn't been exactly the most democratic person, pro-liberty, pro-whatever the people decide. He has been quite authoritarian the last year, and I think that banning books is just another proof of authoritarianism and of not trusting parents with their kids.
I think there's a difference between banning individuals purchasing books, which Ron DeSantis isn't doing from my knowledge, compared to preventing schools from purchasing certain books and storing them in the library and including them on the curriculum. A teacher can't just put anything on a curriculum. If a teacher wanted to put on the curriculum what they had for breakfast that morning, I think the state should be able to, if the state owns the school, they should be able to have that authority to stop that. And in the same way, I think they should have regulations. You wouldn't allow, a book about murder, for example, to be allowed on in the library to be taught to 10-year-olds. There should be restrictions with that. So I think that's a bit different. But there are nuances with it, and I think again we should be calling for school choice. The teachers, the parents who want their children to be taught about LGBTQ issues and think these books are appropriate, they should be allowed to do so. Similarly, the parents who don't should be allowed to bring their students, their children to another school. And I think as well, another thing is greater awareness of what's being taught in these schools, because a lot of the times the parents don't know what's being taught in these schools, and when they find out the material, they're against it. And this is the issue of like the student board, the parent boards, and all that to deal with. But there is a lack of awareness, and I think that's why something like Libs of TikTok has received so much support, because it's exposed what's going on in schools, and parents have had an issue with that. So I think, in terms of whether it's libertarian or not, I don't think it's banning books. I think if Ron DeSantis said, Amazon as a private company cannot store this book, cannot sell this book, I think that would be a massive issue. But I think it's a bit different when a public school, is going out their way, using taxpayer money to purchase this book. I think that's a bit of a different issue.
I think it's also like the problem about like what government does to individuals, which is like you have individuals being less aware of what's going on in their surroundings because they're just like someone else is going to take care of it. And that's the case with education, as you're saying. Like some parents are not aware of what their children are learning, or what like the curriculum is, or what type of books they're going to be reading, what they're being taught, what teachers do they have. Like you have parents being less involved in their children's lives because they're just like, well, the state is going to take care of it. And I'm concerned about that type of behavior. Like we should be aware of of what we're teaching our children. Like I feel like the biggest problem sometimes with government intervention is that it takes away individual responsibility. Like we simply surround it. Like, okay, I'm not accountable anymore for what my children are being taught. I'm not responsible for it anymore. I'm not going to be supervising it anymore because someone else is going to take care of it. And I feel like that in itself is taking responsibility of our lives, takes away also our liberty. Like we do not realize that by surrendering this responsibility, at the same time we're surrendering our liberty to decide what's best for our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people think like the government can do a good job with this, and we've seen in the UK, for example, that the education
Yeah.
system is absolutely awful. I think it's quite awful when students can't do basic maths at the end of like a 9-year education. And I think if there was more school choice, because the state basically treats students as like one single entity, and I think that's the issue with egalitarianism, that it treats like everyone as a certain standard, rather than treating individuals as individuals with different needs, different abilities, and working with that. In a public school system, I know this is a bit off topic, but in a public school system, the teacher doesn't spend all their time trying to promote the best student or even like the middle student. They spend all their time, and I've witnessed this firsthand, they spend all their time telling off the naughty student and putting them in their place, and everyone has to suffer with that. And I think that's a massive issue, and I think that's why school choice is needed. And I think parents don't realise they have a choice, or they don't know the means to do that, because under like a public school system, they don't really have much choice. They can join their parent board, but what are you meant to do if you don't agree with your children's education? You're paying for it through taxes, but you don't get a say at all. Whereas, you can move your child to a different school, maybe. I don't know what the situation is like in Guatemala or the US, but in the UK, there aren't that many different options other than paying like a ridiculous amount for private education, because like the standards are completely different. Whereas if there was more school choice, maybe a school voucher system, I don't know. I'm for that, and I think this is the main thing, providing individuals with choice. I think that's the key we have to hammer home, because individuals have different preferences, whether it be like LGBTQ issues, whether it be the standard of their child's education. I think capitalism just needs to hammer home like we should be providing choice, and it is a possibility. On the topic of woke capitalism, though, it is quite interesting as well, because a lot of LGBTQ supporters would probably call themselves socialists as well, which is interesting, I think, because again, as we've seen until like this year, I'd say they have utilized capitalism, with these companies which are appealing to woke values, to LGBT values, for better or for worse, whatever your opinions are on that. They are utilizing this with boycotts, with unions. I'd say unions, as long as it's libertarian, not lobbying the government, I'd say that's pro freedom, that's pro capitalism, and all that stuff. By consumers creating a demand for it, that is capitalism. So even though they call themselves socialists, they use the means of capitalism to promote their cause.
Yeah, so capitalism and the LGBT community. I think the term capitalism is quite hard for some individuals in the LGBT community to listen to and think about it like in a friendly manner. And I think a lot of that, it's because in the side, like the people that defend capitalism or like libertarianism or like liberty-minded people, we have been quite bad during times to be empathetic to some people. We are quite bad sometimes talking about social topics. We feel like, yeah, that's not something, like it's not a libertarian stance, or that's not a capitalist stuff, like it's just not something we want to speak about. And I think that's a super big problem, because you have people defending capitalism and then saying, oh, those things that hurt your heart and things that do not let you sleep at night, yeah, those are not important to us. And I don't think that's actually true. I think that's absolutely against the truth. We should be talking about these topics, because every time we do not talk about these social issues, we allow the other side to monopolize these debates. So, and like at the same time, we have an actual good ally for the LGBT community. Like countries with economic freedom are the countries in which the LGBT community live happier lives, in which they're actually safer and have healthier individuals. So do we want the LGBT to be better off? Like, if you are LGBT, do you want to live in a better society? Then if you do, then you already know that you need economic freedom to do so. So I think that's something the capitalist side should be speaking about more. We should be taking in these debates. We should be taking in the questions. We should be actually getting concerned about what's concerning other people. And we should be using facts and statistics that literally defend our point.
Yeah, I think the key thing about the libertarian community is that we are a broad church who just all agree with liberty. There are people on the more conservative side, there are people on more of the progressive side, and as long as we all agree on the key thing, like, reduce the size of the government, and we're pro-capitalism or like pro-market, some like libertarians even have a disagreement with the term capitalism,
Yeah.
and I think as long as we can debate, like, there's nothing more libertarians love more than debate, and I think that's so fantastic. And I think just understanding there are different interpretations of this stuff is key. Like Reason magazine and Cato are probably more on the
Mm-hmm.
left side of libertarianism, and they do a fantastic job of emphasizing how a libertarian society would be a society that promotes LGBTQ plus rights. I think that's really key for us to hammer home that point, and also discuss and debate politely these topics. And with that, thank you so much for joining me with the first episode of the Miss Libertarian podcast, Estela. It's been a really useful conversation. And thank you so much to the viewer for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and check out Lola's other social medias. Estela and I we really work hard on trying to promote the liberty message and the freedom philosophy through the Lola social medias. So if you could check that out, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.